Welcome, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where in the world you are. This is the fourth session of Mishnah in-depth Gittin as part of our summer Zman Drisha. This course is a project of Drisha's Rifka Rosenwein Memorial Division and is sponsored in her memory by her family. We have had the pleasure to be learning these past three now onto our fourth week with Miss Leora Balinsky as following as a supplement to the Mishnah Yomit cycle. This class is, going to accompany to the weekly daily cycle, assuming that you have reviewed the various mishnayot over the week. And through this, we're making good progress on Nashim. Sources will be shared on screen as Ms. Balinsky is teaching. And with that, I want to hand things over.
Okay. Thank you, Kayla, so much, as always, for setting everything up and the introductions and making sure that everything is running the way it should be. Hello, everybody. We have exciting mishnayot to discuss this week, and the shiur today will be divided, I would say, into two parts. We will be talking about the notion of darkei shalom that emerges from the fifth parak. And then we will just really B'kiyut style, meaning just going over the review of the halachot in the sixth parak, which really bring us back to our topic at hand, away from the tangent, was it tangential, was it not tangential discussion that we had in the fourth and fifth parak with regard to all these takanot, all these ordinances that were enacted that are not directly related to Gittin, but as we discussed, also do pertain to the notion at Gittin's core of being able to undo or change or move past or affect change within something that needs changing. Even if we thought it was going to work out at first, it's not working out. We need to find a way to make it work. So in that sense, connected, but we are going back in the sixth parak to the halachot of gerushin, of the get, and specifically when it comes to appointing a shaliach or multiple shlichim, multiple agents, or a singular agent to do various tasks pertaining to the writing and the transmission and the receiving, there we go, of the get as well. So we're gonna start off with discussing the concept of darkei shalom. And so for those who recall last week, we were looking at the concept of tikkun olam. And this week we are going to look at another concept that emerges in the Mishnah in the fifth parak, which is darkei shalom. So I am now going to begin my share. So we have, in addition to tikkun olam, we have a couple more concepts that are introduced as motivators for having some sort of chidush or some sort of takana, some sort of change in the halacha and the Mishnah. And so the first one that we see is takanat hashavim. Takanat hashavim, shavim from the language of tshuva. And the case that we have here, for those who learned it during the week, it's I'd say a fairly often discussed case, which is that a person who steals a beam, but then builds that beam into a large building, is able to return the value of that beam rather than returning the beam itself, for the sake of takanat hashavim, for the sake of encouraging people to, or not discouraging people from actually doing tshuva, from actually rectifying their actions and giving things back. So we have the word tikkun keeps on coming up here, although we're going to, darkei shalom, it switches to other language, but we had tikkun olam, and now we have takanat hashavim. So similar language being employed there with this particular case. The next case, also in the fifth Mishnah in Parak Hay, is about a chatat that is gzula, a sin offering that was obtained through robbery, but it was shelo noda l'rabim, that it's not everyone knew that the sin offering was obtained through robbery. It nonetheless affects atonement. It is mechaperet because of tikkun hamizbeach, for the the Sfard translates it says as benefit of the altar. But it is the Gemara, what the Gemara explains is that it's a similar logic here, that the thinking here is that if it were the case that a new chatat would have to be given each time that this happened, then in that scenario, the Kohanim would be incredibly dejected and also reluctant to actually offer a korbanot, and out of fear that what would be offered would be something that was arrived at through means of chet, of sin. And therefore, we say that this still goes through in order to allow us in order to not discourage the offering of further korbanot. So similar rationale in whether we're talking about korbanot or whether we're talking about tshuva in these two other, I don't know if we want to call them meta halachic concepts or not, that emerge out of the fifth parak, or the fifth Mishnah of the fifth parak. Now we are moving on to Darkei Shalom. And so we have a lot of examples of what constitutes Darkei Shalom. We have a lot of different cases that span many different areas, talking about many different kinds of people as well. And when I looked into the concept of Darkei Shalom, one place I started was an article by Dr. Simcha Fishbane, where he traces the concept, and it is discussed 14 times in the Mishnah. And the first time it appears is also in the Mishnah, within 5 separate mishnayot. And so Gittin constitutes the bulk of those mishnayot, but it also appears in Masechet Shvit a few times, and the ninth Mishnah, the Mishnah Tet of the fifth parak, is just lifted from Shvit, and it also appears in Masachet Shkalim once, but Gittin is really where the bulk of it is found. And so it's interesting because we have Tikkun Olam, and then we move on to a related but distinct concept. And what we're going to discuss is also what makes these two concepts distinct. How distinct are they? And I would also love to hear everyone's thoughts on that from their learning, what they saw as the similarities and differences between Tikkun Olam cases versus Darkei Shalom cases. And yeah, so here we have many cases of Darkei Shalom. I highlighted it, and as you can see, it shows up a lot in this Mishnah. I don't think we're going to go through each and every case necessarily, but maybe we'll go through a few. So I think the first one here is significant, that one of the matters that was instituted, Mipnei Darkei Shalom, you could translate that as for the sake of peace, on account of the ways of peace, however you want to say it, is that Kohen Koreh Rishon v'acharav Levi v'acharav Yisrael Mipnei Darkei Shalom. So the translation and explanation of that already tells us what is underlying this halacha. So a Kohen will read first, then Levi, and then Yisrael, as we do today as well, for the sake of peace. So the question is, what happened before that? And our explanation here says, so that people should not quarrel about who is the most distinguished member of the community. Meaning, relates us to a Mishnah. We'll go back down here in Masachet Horayot, that tells us in general the order of importance of different people in our tradition. This is also, I think, a concept that for a lot of people is not always the easiest to swallow. And there's what to be said about what does it mean that these people proceed, that there is this hierarchy within what is considered to be of value within our tradition, and how do we understand that? How do we relate to that? Great question. We're not going to get into it now. But we see that a Kohen Kodem Levi, a Kohen comes before Levi, a Levi Yisrael, Levi comes before Yisrael. So far consistent with what we see in what our Mishnah and Gittin tells us about the order of Kriyat Torah. Yisrael, a mamzer, someone who has untarnished lineage, Yisrael lineage, comes before a mamzer, and a mamzer comes before a natin. They translate as a Gibeonite, one of the Givonim. The natin leger, and a natin comes before a convert. and a convert comes before a freed slave. As we discussed last week, when an Eved Kanani becomes free, they take on the status of Yisrael. But as we see with here, there is still a hierarchical, there's still the bottom of the hierarchy here. Eimatai bisman shekulan shavin. So that's assuming all things being equal. Aval imaya mamzer talmid chacham, the kohen gadol am haaretz, mamzer talmid chacham, kodem lekohen gadol am haaretz. So all things being equal, that's the order. But when things are not equal in terms of the level of wisdom, as the English explanation says, in terms of the level of knowledge, that's the thing that we actually point to more. So it's what's interesting and also characteristic of discussing tensions during the Second Temple period and post Second Temple period is we have on the one hand the institution of the priesthood, on the other hand the institution of the Rabbanit that develops however we want to call that. And I think this is an encapsulation of that tension. And so we see here that really it's not just about this static category that you are born into or that is affected, that it affects you, but rather about the amount of knowledge that you have. And then what we have in the first Mishnah, in the first case in the Mishnah that discusses Darkei Shalom, is that no, actually, when it comes to, and presumably that hierarchy that we just saw in Masechet Horayot also applies to all matters where it would be relevant, including Kriyat Torah. And we say, no, actually, nowadays, that is not the way it's going to go anymore. Because the question is why. This explanation says that people should not quarrel about who is the most distinguished member of the community. So to prevent some sort of fighting, to prevent argumentation, instead we just have these, okay, we're not gonna argue about it. It's gonna be out of our hands in a sense, and thereby therefore with that we're gonna be able to actually get through it and get through Kriyat Torah. And this is shared with the characteristic of this one of trying to prevent infighting in terms of who gets a certain slut, is also relevant in the second case discussed here, which is when you're doing an Eruv Chatzerot, when you are creating an Eruv to allow for carrying on Shabbat. Deborah, yeah?
No. Finish the example and then I'm happy to.
Okay, great. So when you are creating an Eruv Chatzerot, it's a question of where do you actually place there's food that is either bread or something else that can serve as bread, that is placed as the central item that joins everyone together. And the question is, where do you place that? Nowadays, traditionally, it's placed in shuls. Apparently, that is for Ashkenazim, yes, but actually for Sephardim, that's not the case. It's considered to be a problem to put it in a Beit Knesset, but here we're presuming that it would be in a house, and we say that, okay, the house that it's going to go to is the Bayit Yashan, which is understood as the first place that it was. So basically, I don't know, it's not finders keepers is the term, but first is the Kol Kodem Zocheh, the first one who gets there is the one who gets it. The first person who has the slut is the one who will continue having it, so that there isn't an argument over, okay, who gets it this week, who is the most qualified to have it, because it's considered to be an honor to have it in your home. Deborah, if you want to ask now.
Yeah, no, it was just more a reflection of the way I didn't keep up with the mishnayot this week, but the way I usually think of the word peace is not always internal within the Jewish community, but outside of it. And so all of a sudden, reading the Kohen Levi Yisrael distinction is reminding me of maintaining the peace or maintaining a calm, so that you're not like re-adjudicating, like the hierarchy every time. Like this is just decided. So I heard myself like imagining movies of Speak Now or Forever Hold Your Peace. And I was actually wondering whether it's PIECE, like you don't get to say what you want, but your peace, or PEACE, which I assume is what it actually means. But that was what kind of stream of consciousness came to my mind.
Oh, I love that. But I also think it's interesting what you're pointing out, which is that when you think of peace, you generally think of something that is not internal, but rather external, meaning like between Jews and other nations, like when you're talking about peace, like peace as opposed to war, not peace as opposed to argumentation or discomfort.
Yeah.
And
clearly that is not what's reflected in these texts. These texts are more expansive.
And I think what's interesting is that the concept, and we will also address this in a little bit later too, but the concept of Darkei Shalom, I think colloquially, the identity it took on, or the connotations it took on, was very much that, like, not only the word shalom, but also the notion of darchei shalom, that we do certain things with the goyim for the sake of darchei shalom. And we don't really think of it as something that is internal, even though we see here that it very much is. And that's the place that we start out from. And so I also just want to note now that in discussing various things related to darchei shalom, we're going to start off here with the case of, like, the first character mentioned is a Kohen. And then when we conclude, as I scroll down, the last thing we have is about goyim, and that we may extend greetings to them because of their shalom. So we start off with the perhaps figure that is most internal to us. That is the highest figure in the in-group, arguably, again, whether we're talking about a Talmud Chacham or a Kohen, but say we're still nonetheless a Kohen with their lineage, right? You have this untainted lineage. You're really a part of the in-group. You're part of the people. And then we end with Goyim. And in the middle are all sorts of people of varying status within the community. So I'm glad that he pointed that out, because I think we'll see that is sort of what it evolves into over the course of the mishnayot, and then in turn throughout the Jewish consciousness of how we think about this term. So then okay. Let's talk about in brief about a few more cases, and then we'll go on to talk about what shalom might mean. So we have another similar case where we continue in a similar vein of, now we're not talking about something that is a matter of status. I will also say that it's possible that the person who had the Eruv actually received some sort of, this is what Fishbane suggests, received some sort of financial gain from having the Eruv in their house, in the sense that they might be able to actually eat it. So it might be beneficial from that standpoint. Fishbane's overall argument is that a lot of these cases entail, not all of them, but a lot of them entail matters of financial gain. The first one less so, but that you can read that into these cases of Darkei Shalom, that we're not just talking about peace independent of some sort of economic, sociological reality. So the next case of a pit that really would serve as a well, whichever one is closest is the one that's filled first, so that you don't have an argument over who gets to fill it first. It's just, we're going to go by proximity. So it's basically eliminating the having to make decisions based off of anything that is subjective. And instead, we're just going with external characteristics that allow us to create some sort of hierarchy, which is presumably going to be seen as more fair or inspire less controversy than when we make decisions based off of more subjective criteria, which is interesting, because that is kind of the opposite way that we think of fairness now. Maybe not, but I think the whole notion of judging people based on the content of their character, not based off of external characteristics, and not only looking at a person's background and being judgmental and prejudiced about that, but actually trying to achieve some sort of equality of outcome that's actually based off of people's characteristics, I think actually is seen as the thing that would be more fair and less contestable, as opposed to this. Although then I'm just really thinking out loud here. This has occurred to me until just now. I suppose if we think about maybe certain policies of affirmative action actually do kind of go back into this model. So I guess it's a question of what is perceived to be the fairest depending on our reality. Now we move on to a different topic, which is that of really finders keepers. Now it is a relevant term, where if there are animals that end up in your trap, if someone takes those animals from your trap, that's considered to be thievery, theft, because of Darkei Shalom. Oh, Deborah, is that a hand again? No. Okay, sorry. I thought I saw another movement. Because of Darkei Shalom, meaning that even though you don't actually halachically take possession of animals by virtue of them ending up in your trap, there has to be a more active act that you do in order to acquire things. Nonetheless, we're going to let you we're going to consider stealing them to be a type of theft. Well, Rabbi Yossi thinks that it's not only Darkei Shalom. Rabbi Yossi thinks that it's actually fully Gezel Gamor, perhaps Deoraita, as opposed to some sort of notion of Gezel Midarabanan. And then similar with when a Cher Shoten Katan, and when a deaf-mute, an imbecile, or someone in someone that's their translation, someone experiencing some type of insanity, and a minor, they don't technically they're not technically able to acquire things. We will actually relate somewhat to this concept when it comes to a minor woman who is trying to accept a get. But nonetheless, so if they find a lost object, it shouldn't actually belong to them because they don't actually acquire it halachically. But nonetheless, they will because of Darkei Shalom. Rabbi Yossi thinks, again, that this is full gazel. This is actually full theft if you were to take it from them. It's not just because of Darkei Shalom, presumably. And then we have a final scenario about a poor person who is gleaning olives on the top of a tree, and olives fall down. Technically, those ones that fell do not immediately belong to this poor person, but nonetheless, for another person to take it is considered to be theft because again of Darkei Shalom. So what these have in common is cases in which a person does not actually acquire something halachically, but for the sake of, I guess that's a question of, for the sake of what? For the sake of some sort of societal harmony. Harmony is probably a relevant word to use here, or for the sake of fairness also, or maybe not fairness. Maybe that's actually not a relevant category, a relevant consideration. But because of that, we go, you could think of it maybe as above and beyond the letter of the law, or just different from what the law is, for the sake of them being able to receive these items. Another way of looking at this is that we make these laws so that there wouldn't be fights that would break out between different groups of people in terms of trying to understand what belongs to who. So it could be we could think of it as fairness, think of it as harmony. Fairness and shalom aren't really the same word. So maybe fairness isn't relevant here, although I feel that in my kishkas a bit. So we have harmony, and then we also have the concept of which is really the same thing, I suppose. It's all, yeah, it's about harmony and not leading to a state of social discord and violence. And then the final one that we have here is that, and which is related again, but I think moving maybe in a more expansive way, in a more expansive direction, is that poor people who are not Jewish, you do not prevent them from taking leket, shicha, and peah, from taking the parts of the field that we are of our produce that we are commanded to leave for the poor, but only for the poor Jews, whether it's gleanings, the forgotten sheaves, or the produce from the corners. Because again, the notion of Darkei Shalom. And here, I think this is where Deborah's consideration, we can see it, what Deborah's instincts were about shalom, we can see is maybe already coming into play, that if it was seen, obviously, that there was different treatment given to non-Jews versus Jews, that could inspire a lot of enmity and bad will, and perhaps inter-community violence, as opposed to the intra-community issues that we saw above. Or you could see this as just another way of maybe trying to make things more peaceful in general, in a more giving, harmonious society, without perhaps that specific fear. I think you could read this in different ways. So that is the first mission that we have about Darkei Shalom. The second Mishnah that we have about Darkei Shalom has fewer cases, and we are talking here about something more specific as well, which is relationships between Jews that are keeping and aware of different levels of halacha, different levels of knowledge, which I think is a concept that can be very relevant in our times, depending, and the question of how to navigate these issues is one that a lot has been written about. But what we have here is what a woman can lend to her friend during the Shemitah year, where you would be reluctant, and you would think that it was not allowed to lend these items that are used for making food on a Shemitah year. Post Shemitah year, rather, for that grew on the Shemitah year, sorry. But because it's no longer permitted to eat it, but we say that she actually can still lend it to her friend, these items to her friend, even if her friend is suspected on these items of not being able to, being used with things that are not able to be used any longer. But she can't go so far as to actually help her in the process. So, and that's what the explanation says here. She may not actively assist her in the performance of a sin. So we can go so far. We can make certain leaps for the sake of harmony, but we can't go, there are still certain boundaries. And then we say, in general, not during Shemitah, but a chaver being a person who is, we could see it as, it's a question of how to translate chaver in this context. We could understand it as someone who is devoted to meticulous observance of mitzvot. Generally, it does refer to someone who knows to take trumot and masrot. It could also refer specifically to Talmid Chacham. It seems like here it is referring to someone who's aware of the halachot of trumot masrot and keeps those. You can give it to an am haaretz, to the wife of an am haaretz, a woman who is an am haaretz, someone who is not meticulous in these halachot, and you can give her these items, but you can't go so far as to engage in and you can actually engage in certain actions with her. You can actually sift with her, but once there's water, which creates a dough, and then we have issues of tuma, of ritual impurity that come into play, then no longer. So we do certain things for Darkei Shalom, and we see v'chulan lo amru ela mipnei Darkei Shalom. This is the rationale given is because of Darkei Shalom. We can make certain steps, but we can't go all the way. And then we end again with goyim again. So we can see goyim who are working the land during a Shemitah year, and we can say, "Good for you. You plow that, sir." Something along those lines. But you can't, if you see Israel working the land, you can't do that. And the reason why that is a chiddush is because ideally, in an ideal scenario, the land is presumably supposed to lay fallow for everyone. It's not technically forbidden for goyim to be working it, but you are allowed to nonetheless encourage them in that. And you also sholim b'shloman in general, not just during Shemitah, because of Darkei Shalom, for the sake of shalom. And so now the question of how we translate shalom actually comes into the fore, where I think when we say shalom, peace, I think everyone has different concepts in mind. What would be some synonyms for peace? Rachel?
Well, before, when you were talking, I was thinking of wholeness, because it has sort of the economic aspect too of repayments, and also like here, it seems like you're compromising for the sake of some sort of communal alliance, like to keep some group of people intact rather than fighting.
And meaning the wholeness element, like you're compromising, what you're keeping whole is the society, or a certain group. Nice. So wholeness, also from the word like shalom, shalem, something being whole, shlemut. Yeah. Anyone have any other synonyms to offer? Anyone feel free to pop in. Okay, so I have some, so have no fear. I have a list of things of what shalom can mean. So it can mean peace. The question is what peace means, right? So there is a peace that is like an active. There's a term for this that is not coming to mind. So if anyone knows what I'm saying, please tell me. It's like warm peace or cold peace, something like that, where there's a peace where the parties that are in this peaceful relationship have there is perhaps maybe a sense of goodwill between the group, something that where the word harmony, I think, can also come into play, where as opposed to shalom, which is understanding of basically being left alone. And we're doing okay. No one is infringing on our territory. No one is bothering us. No one's hurting us. And in that sense, we are shalom really from the understanding of safe. So there's like living in harmony as opposed to some sort of type of safety. So, and then it could also mean, like Rachel said, wholeness, completeness. Another understanding of shalom is just like welfare, which then when we're talking about these various examples, when we're talking about the individuals who are, especially when it comes to the ones that are about like what the Cherashot and the Katan find, the Mitzvah that they find, the objects that they find, and also things that are found that are in traps, and also the poor person's olives. Those are all situations where you can think of that as being about their actual personal welfare and the welfare of those categories of people in society. So that might come into play there. Safety, I said, that relates to the colder peace notion. We could also think of it as prosperity, which is the economic element that we can read into a lot of these, and harmony or congeniality as well. So, or the absence of agitation or discord. So I think that depending, I think different cases in this Mishnah call to mind different definitions. I think it might be hard actually to have one consistent definition throughout. Maybe the absence of discord works, but it'd be better also to have a positive definition too. But we can see that shalom can mean a variety of things. And so the argument that Fishbane makes, and which is the argument that I think is fairly commonplace with regard to what Darkei Shalom is all about, is really looking at and this is where I think there's interplay with understanding of Tikkun Olam, that it's really meant as an internal category with external implications, in the sense that it is a concept about seeking social stability and social order, and that the institution of these halacha because of Darkei Shalom, it's in essence meant to avoid conflict, and that could be internal conflict or external conflict, and that when we see non-Jews being brought up, the concern is not for their welfare, but rather for our welfare, really, for the sake of social cohesion and the protection and our protection. He relates this a little bit to various like social theories, and what he suggests is that we're talking about an attempt to basically lower the take the individual out of the focus, and instead emphasize the culture and the group. And so he quotes Mary Douglas, who says there are visible rules about space and times related to social rules. Individuals do not, as such, transact with each other. So everything that you have is actually predictated. The protocol for everything is predictated, and therefore, when individuals are interacting with each other, there isn't this like actual complete, there isn't this full transaction, because everything was already predetermined of how this interaction would go. So you're not actually functioning as an individual. So what Darkei Shalom serves is to, again, promote the society and the culture, perhaps at the expense of an individual. And I think this relates to the notion of Tikkun Olam that we looked at that Sagit more elaborated on, that was also focused on Jewish society's flourishing, and advancing policies that kept the society functioning and also delineated the religious and national boundaries of the collective and maintained those. And if we go back to to an article that I think I reference every week, which I began with in the first week, which is Dr. David Brodsky's article about Masachet Gittin and how he explains Masachet Gittin and the centrality of Tikkun Olam in the middle of it, which I literally already referenced today. But he talks about the drawing of boundaries and the renegotiation of boundaries as standing at the center here. And he thinks that our mishnayot about Darkei Shalom are actually really central there too. And this is something that I haven't said yet that he says, which is that what we're doing in Masachet Gittin is talking about the demarcation of who is associated with who belongs to who, and a renegotiation of that. That's what Gittin and that's what the relationship between husband and wife represents. But we end up in the ninth Mishnah of the fifth parak. Back to just pull it up, we end up also demarcating who is in and out of bounds of the rabbinic community. And so we make a distinction between a Eshet Chaver and an Eshet Am Haaretz, and that's like an important distinction. And we can go only so far in helping them, but not all the way. There's some sort of boundary that has to be maintained. And then we go on to discuss non-Jews as well. And so we are continuing to discuss really who is in and out of bounds. And that's a part of the overall agenda of the Masachet, which is dictating boundaries of the people as a Jewish people, which we see in the very beginning of the Mishnah, in the first parak, for those who remember, that discusses the boundaries of Eretz Yisrael. That's what our Mishnah, in a surprising way, we, instead of opening up with really discussing the intricacies of the divorce law, we end up just establishing, okay, what is considered in and what is considered out. And that's also what is happening here. So it's very cool when all these things relate, and when we see these themes emerging throughout different parts of the Mishnah, and we can then again really see the Mishnah as a coherent whole. And these are arguments that I think are not necessarily like, again, you could take them or leave them, but I find them very compelling, or else I wouldn't be sharing them. I think it's very cool. But I also just want to note that what I've said so far is about really the focus is on Jews and the Jewish people, and non-Jews here are really just a side point. We only mention them in order to bolster up our own safety. I now want to look at a different concept of Darkei Shalom that emerges out of the Rambam. I learned this Rambam when I was 19, and for me, it was like I don't know if this is a phrase, but like a drink of like fresh, cool water. Like it was just like so refreshing and beautiful the way that he explains this concept of Darkei Shalom. Because I'll explain in my end of my teenage angst, I guess. Which still have it honestly, but it made me upset. It made me feel sad. That when I was encountering all of these concepts in Judaism that seemed to really view all these positive, beautiful interactions between people who were not exactly like each other purely instrumentally. And so for the sake of Darkei Shalom, only so that the Goyim won't kill us, or Mishum Eva, so that the Goyim won't hate us, something along those lines, which I found to be a bit just sad and upsetting. And that might be I think that when you probably look internal to our Mishnah, that might be the concept that comes out, but that's not how the Rambam reads the concept. And so I want to look at the Rambam in Hilchot Melachim here, where he says, Afilu akum tzivu chachamim levaker cholehem velikvor matehem im metei Yisrael v'farnes aniyehem bichlal aniyei Yisrael mipnei darkei shalom. So these are examples that actually emerge in the Gemara of the fifth parak of Masachet Gittin. These examples do not emerge from our Mishnah, but they are elaborated on, where even for akum, and again, specifically akum, although I guess that also might be a question of versions of the Rambam due to censorship, I'm not sure, that is beyond my pay grade, but that the Chachamim commanded us to visit their sick and to bury their dead with our dead, and also to support their poor, which we do see an example of that happening with regard to Lachet, Shecha, and Peah in the 8th Mishnah of the 5th Perek, because of Darkei Shalom. And how does he explain what Darkei Shalom is? Harina Amar in Tehillim, Tov Hashem lakol v'rachamav al kol ma'asav v'ne'amar dracha darchei noam v'chol nativotei shalom. So I'd say the obvious connection is the second pasuk he brings in, where we have it's interesting, instead of saying mipnei nativot shalom, we say mipnei darkei shalom, right? The pasuk is that its ways are pleasant ways, and all of its paths are of peace, called nativot shalom. But then that's where we get the phrase darkei shalom from. And looking at this pasuk, it seems like it's not an external consideration, but rather the Torah is peaceful, and therefore we do things for the sake of peace. And so developing these concepts is just for the sake of really fulfilling the Torah's agenda of peace, which I think in this context doesn't seem to be a negative definition of avoiding conflict, of avoiding discord, of avoiding violence. But when you have it juxtaposed with Noam, it seems to be a much more positive definition. And perhaps we can go for harmony here, welfare. I think harmony might make sense here, especially when we look at it alongside Noam. So the reason of Darkei Shalom is really because of the Chol Nativotei Shalom. That's what really the Torah is about, and thus that is the value that we are called to emulate. What I think is more interesting, maybe, although I think that's pretty nice too, is that we have Tov Hashem lakol v'rachamav al kol ma'asav, where we see that God is good, and his mercy extends to all his creations. Why is that relevant to the concept of Darkei Shalom? I think it's not immediately obvious that this would be a pasuk that we would invoke when describing Darkei Shalom, but it is apparent for the Rambam that this actually is an explanation. And it seems like what the Rambam is getting at is that Hashem is merciful towards all of his creations, and so too we should be merciful to all of Hashem's creations. And therefore, Darkei Shalom is actually a call for imitatio Odeh, for actually acting in the ways of God, emulating the ways of Hashem. Darkei Shalom is really like Darkei Hashem, Kiviyachol, in that sense. And therefore it's super, super not some sort of external consideration in order to avoid conflict, in order to avoid war, in order to avoid discomfort of other levels. But really, this is actually an internal moral call, not an purely instrumental utilitarian call. And so I think the concept that emerges of Darkei Shalom in the Rambam is one that presents a different light than one that we might have when reading the Mishnah at first blush. Maybe not. Maybe other people who learned this week read the whole Mishnah this week and actually read this into it as well. But it's a very beautiful Rambam. I have a quote here that I actually think I might skip. I'm going to skip this quote from Rav Lichtenstein, but I will send this over to Kayla, who can send it to you afterwards for those who want to read this quote. Thank you, Kayla. And now we are going to move on to the 6th Perek. But if anyone has any questions or comments or thoughts, I would love to hear that first. Okay, moving on to the 6th Perek. So the 6th Perek, in a very fun way, picks up like right where we left off in the very beginning of the 4th Perek. In the 4th Perek, we discussed what happens when a person appoints a shaliach, when a person appoints an emissary, and can they cancel the get? Can they not? And then we again get off on this whole tangent, and now we're back. We're right back where we left off, which I love. And there are two concepts that are essential for this perek, for understanding this perek, which I think I have mentioned in previous weeks as well. One is a shaliach leholacha, an agent or an emissary for taking, meaning for taking the get towards the woman. So going from shaliach leholacha is from the man to the woman. And then we have shaliach lekabbalah, which is an agent of accepting the get, of receiving the get, but really I think the word accepting might be, no, both work. And that's from the woman to the man. So the woman can appoint an emissary to accept the get on her behalf. But again, each can only appoint a shaliach of that specific variety. For a man to make a shaliach kabbalah, for a man to appoint a shaliach for accepting the get wouldn't make any sense, because it's the woman, that's what the woman does. She accepts the get. So the shaliach halacha is the man, the shaliach kabbalah is the woman. And then there's also a little there's a third category too, which is shaliach hava'ah, which is a shaliach of bringing the get. And that's also when a woman appoints a shaliach not to accept the get on her behalf, but to take it from either the man or from the shaliach that the man sent, and then bring it back to her in order for her to then accept. Okay. Are those categories clear? Anyone have any questions? Okay, great. And so those are categories that are present in all of these mishnayot. And so what we see, and we're just gonna, I guess, in the remaining 13 minutes, really go over b'kiyut what is happening in these mishnayot. For those who already learned them, I think it'll be a helpful summary and repetition of seeing these also things as a whole. For those who haven't learned them yet, hopefully this will be more information about the divorce process, which is always exciting. And I also say I really loved the tangent, whatever we want to call it, that we did, but there's also something so nice about being like, oh, back to the topic at hand. But so it's nice to be reading these mishnayot together. So we see that if a person says to receive this bill of divorce for my wife, or walk this to my wife, if he wants to retract it, he can retract it. And so we see here that it's not, the understanding is that it's not literally saying receive this for my wife, because he's not actually able to do that. No matter what language the husband uses, he's considered to be, this shaliach would be considered to be a shaliach holacha, one who is bringing the get over to her. And so at that point, he can undo it. So by contrast, if a woman tells a shaliach to accept the get on her behalf, she cannot take that back. Once that's done, it's done. Sorry, he cannot retract. Once the woman has the get, and once the agent has the get, it's as if the woman has the get. In that situation, you're done. The divorce is done. There is nothing for him to retract at that point. So, לפיכך, אם אמר לו הבעל, אי אפשי שתקבל לה, אלא הולך ותן לה, אם רצה לחזור, יחזור. So, what he's able to do, actually, and this is what's very interesting, is he's able to take and this is understanding, is that we're talking about a situation where the husband, basically, he meets this shaliach that was sent by the woman to accept the get on her behalf, and he says to her, I don't want you to accept this get. I actually want you to bring this get to her, effectively changing him from a shaliach kabbalah to a shaliach holacha, and that is within his capability to do. So he's able to actually do that and change the status. And then Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel adds in that even if someone says, "Bring the get for me" or "Take it for me," that is considered as if, according to Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, that would be considered as if she were saying, "Accept the get on my behalf," and therefore the husband would not be able to retract his decision after handing it over to that shaliach. That's the first Mishnah. So the first Mishnah, again, delineates the process, for part of the process of what is the point of no return when it comes to handing a get over to an emissary. And the Mishnah Bet discusses what happens when a woman does appoint someone to receive the get on her behalf, and we say that she needs two sets of adim. They can be the same adim, but two sets of adim to say that she appointed the agent to do this, and 2, to say that the agent actually received the get from the husband and also tore it. So the question is, what are we talking about that the get was torn? What does this refer to? So the Gemara says that the reason that the Mishnah talks about a get being torn is because we are talking about a situation of a shmad, or we're talking about a situation where Jews are being persecuted and are not able to practice the Torah, and therefore, if the get were to be found, it would be very dangerous. It would be an indicator that Jews were actually doing their Jewish rituals, and therefore, the get was immediately torn for the sake of avoiding that scenario. The Rambam says that if we're talking about a case that the shaliach tore the get, then that's why we need edim to basically attest the fact that that happened. And the Meiri says that this is just an explanation, basically, of some sort of reason why the shaliach, no longer has the get with him. So it's just an example of something that could happen, but you don't actually strictly need to have testimony about this particular issue. We see for a case of a nara mu'urasa, so we continue with a similar case in the sense of we're talking about the intricacies of the process of a get being accepted by the woman. So the Tanakama says that she, nara mu'urasa is a betrothed young woman, understood to be between the ages of 12 and 12 and a half. So her and her father could each receive the get. Theoretically, Rabbi Yehuda says, no, it can't be that both are able to do this. Only her father is able to. And then we say that any girl who is not capable of actually lishmor al gita, who's not capable of actually looking after her get, ena yechola lehidgarish. So is not actually able to be divorced. Basically, we're talking about if you're divorcing someone who does not have enough da'at to actually understand what is the implications, then that person is not someone who can actually get divorced. Moving on to the third Mishnah, we're going lightning round here. A minor female, I was going to say woman, but no, a girl. There we go. A girl who says to an agent to accept the get on her behalf. That does not work. It's not actually considered to be a get until it gets into her hands. The reason for this is that a katana, a minor, is not able to actually appoint a shaliach, and therefore this would not. It doesn't actually affect anything, and it only she has to actually receive it. And therefore, in that situation, even after the Baal hands over the get, or the Baal's agent hands over the get to the shaliach of the katana, even in that situation, he can still retract his decision. But if the father appoints a shaliach, and this is, I guess, this is a bit of a chiddush, perhaps, that the father, despite not being the girl, because he's able because he has control over his daughter at this point, because he is able to actually appoint a shaliach to accept the get on his daughter's behalf. And when that happens, it actually counts as a full shaliach kabbalah. And at that point, the husband would not be able to retract it. And so then we also see that that it matters if someone says to give his wife a get in a specific location and it was given in a different place, then the get is considered pasul. But if the husband said that if he said that, not that give the get in this place, but give the get and my wife is in this place, meaning my wife is probably found in this place, then you're allowed to give it to the wife or to the wife's shaliach in a different place. And we see the same thing applies with a woman who says that to accept the get in a particular location, that if it is accepted in a different location, the get is pasul. Rabbi Eliezer is machshir. Rabbi Eliezer disagrees because he thinks that the wife's will does not actually matter in this situation. If the woman appoints a shaliach hava'ah, a emissary, an agent to just bring her the get for her to accept on wherever she wants to, it doesn't matter where that happens. Even if she said it should happen in a particular place and happen in a different place, it is still kasher. And now we move on to a fun Mishnah, in the sense that this Mishnah, I think, presents to us a helpful nafka mina, a helpful practical difference in at what point the wife is considered to be divorced. And so the case here, I'd say the test case that we have here is a woman who is married to a Kohen, and by virtue of being married to a Kohen, can eat truma. And so if the woman says to a shaliach, haveli giti, then she is able to eat truma until the get comes to her hand. The reason for this is that she's not divorced until the get comes to her hand, because she didn't tell the shaliach to accept the get, she just told him to bring the get. So therefore, until she's not actually divorced, even though she knows this is happening, right? She appoints someone to get it. It's all in the works. It's not actually considered final until she accepts it. That is the act that delineates when she is no longer her husband's wife. But by contrast, if she appoints a shaliach kabbalah to receive the get on her behalf, then she is unable to eat the truma immediately after making that decision. If she says hitkabeli gitimo komploni ochala petruma ad sheyagia get lo to makom. So if she appoints a shaliach kabbalah and makes a specification and says it should be you should receive it in a particular place, then rather than being in effect immediately that she can no longer eat truma, it is actually when we can estimate that the shaliach was able to get to that place that she specified, whether it's a number of days or hours. But Rabbi Eliezer oser miyad. Rabbi Eliezer thinks that it is immediately prohibited for the same reason that he thinks that it is kosher for a shaliach to accept a get in a place that is other than what the wife delineated, because he thinks that the wife's preferences in these matters don't actually have halachic weight. So he's consistent in these opinions throughout. We have 2 minutes. I might go like 3 minutes over, and then I will let you all go. I just want to make sure that we get through these halachot. Thank you, Kayla.
That is fine. That is absolutely fine.
Okay, thank you. What do we have here? Yes, we have here, this is where we get into specific language that of the husband expressing his desire to divorce his wife. What do we do with that? So if the husband says, kitvu get utsnu ishti, it says to write this bill of divorce and give it to my wife, or divorce her, or write this scroll and give it to her. Those are all different cases in which a person who overhears that person, he tells them, the person that he's talking to is able to then write a get and deliver it. That is considered to be that it's clear that is what the husband is instructing these people to do, and that's enough. But if he says pitrua to release her, parnasua to sustain her, asula kinimus, act politely with her, asula kiraui, do what's right with her, do what's right by her, lo amar klum. These are all, even if he intended to divorce her with these words, that is not considered to be specific enough language. It's ambiguous language, and therefore it's as if he said nothing at all. And now we introduce a situation that we will maintain in the 6th Mishnah as well, where it's actually just enough to say kitvu get liishti and not to say utsnu. So we saw in the pasuk that we learn all of this, the whole institution of divorce from v'chatav la sefer kritut v'natan be'ada. We see that the ketiva, the writing, and the netina, the giving, are supposed to be really together, and therefore it's really also really important to emphasize both elements. But now we see in certain situations we actually allow for just saying that tiva is enough. One of these is when a person is yotzei v'kolar, meaning a person is about to be executed. In that scenario, we can assume that when they say kitvu get, just write the get for my wife, what they really mean is also give it, but they're shaken up, they feel like they don't have time. We can read between the lines though and understand that that's what they mean. That's what they said at first. And again, notice that we have Barishona again, where we have something happening at first and then things changing. We then expand this further to someone who is going on a afam mefaresh, someone who is going out to sea, and also hayotze b'shayra, someone who is going on a caravan. When they're leaving town, even them just saying kitvu get liishti, that's enough. As opposed to also saying tsnu, and as opposed to saying to deliver to her. And Rabbi Shimon adds further that a person who is dangerously ill, hamisukan, someone who is in a state of danger, is also able to make that same pronouncement of just writing the get is enough. And I think we see here is an expansion of situations in which we might we want the wife to be unambiguously unambiguously divorced or able to be divorced in these scenarios. And we're almost done. We now have and I guess we'll just do this very, very quickly because it's time to go. A situation, and this is an interesting situation. Someone is in a pit and they can't see anyone, but they just yell, asking for someone to write a bill of divorce for their wife. In that situation as well, even if they don't say to give it, it is considered to be able to be given. We can say that this person thinks that they're in a state of danger, and therefore the same considerations apply. But when a healthy person does this, we understand, and just says to write it, but not to give it, we understand them as just really wanting to taunt his wife. The language here is l'sachek ba. And then we have a Maisa brought up. We have a situation brought up in which a person said to just write the get for my wife, not to give it to her. And then he ended up going onto a roof and falling off and dying. So we really just upped the ante here. And the Chachamim say that if he jumped off the roof, basically, if he fell willingly, then the get is valid. But if he was pushed off by the wind, then it's not valid. Meaning, we can understand his intentions retroactively, that if he was in a situation where he was about to do this drastic action of jumping off the roof, that's an indicator that he really meant it when he said to divorce his wife. When he said to write a get for his wife, he also meant to divorce her, to have it delivered into her hands. But if it was just a tragic accident in that situation, then it is not to be considered a get. The Gemara explains here, and we're not going to read it, but that the Mishnah actually is missing some words. And that there's another way of looking at it makes more sense. Anyone who wants to do it can read later. And then our final case is talking about the differences between telling 2 people to write a get versus 3 people to write a get. And to deliver a get versus what happens when you tell 10 people to write and deliver a get, and all the intricacies of what happens when you use different language in front of different groups of people. So for example, if you say in front of 3 people to give my wife a get, can they then serve as a Beit Din because there are 3 people? Can they then actually serve as a Beit Din in of themselves and appoint other people to do it? Yes or no? That's one question. And another question is what happens when you tell 10 people to write it? And so we say that one person can write it and then 2 other people can sign it, and then the rest of the 10 people who overheard that aren't implicated in it. However, if the husband specifically said, Kulchem ktovu, all of you have to write this, then one person has to write and all the rest of them have to sign the get. And therefore, if even one of those people died or disappeared before this process ended up happening, you are not actually able to give the get. So we see here on the one hand in our Mishnah attention, I guess, but in this parak, this 6th parak, of on the one hand expansiveness in terms of interpreting the husband's intentions to divorce his wife more broadly, and on the other hand, seeing the specificities and the boundaries of when we can actually enable a husband to divorce his wife or not. And with that, we are done with a very quick run through of the 6th parak and the interesting halachot pertaining to shlichut that are within it. Thank you, everyone, so much. Sorry that I ran a few minutes over, and looking forward to next week.
All right, and thank you everyone for coming.